Hi, Charles SirBookSage here, and this is the extremely long overdue book haul. I had originally planned to film this back in March, according to my notes. March 29 book haul. And it's now June 29th, so yeah, a bit late. But that just means there's more. So this is going to be broken up into ebooks first, some Audible, and then the physical books last. When it comes to buying ebooks randomly, mainly I end up buying stuff that pops up on sale. There's always these like flash sales by publishing companies where that book, the ebook will be on sale for like $1.99 or something. So a lot of these purchases are those special sales. So starting off with my favorite author, of course, Tolkien. They had a special sale for the ebooks of Beren and Luthien, The Children of Hurin, and The Fall of Gondolin. I own them all on hardcover. I own various paperback versions of the first two. But yeah, there's no such thing as owning too much Tolkien, too many copies of Tolkien. So yeah, I had to pick those up. So I'm glad I have them on my Kindle so that I can just dive into them whenever I want. Next up is The Green Man's Heir by Juliet E. McKenna. I don't really know much about this. I am familiar with the author, but I don't really know much about this story, but I wanted to pick it up. Now, a very popular fantasy series is the whole Witcher thing, and Adrian Tchaikovsky's series. I've actually never read that. It's something I plan to get to, but that's probably more of a maybe in 2020 kind of thing. But he has a new series out called After the War. And the first book, I picked up the first two books in that series. And the first one is Redemption's Blade, written by Adrian Tchaikovsky. And the second book is Salvation's Fire, written by Justina Robson. I think his plan is each book in the series is going to be written by a different author. I think that's kind of what he's doing with it. So he wrote the first one, and then other authors will take it from there. So I just picked up those two just to check it out. And another one, again, purchased on sale, is one of my favorite authors is Kate Elliott. I've read her Crown of Stars series, is what I was in the middle of reading when I first joined BookTube like a couple of years ago. And they had her High Road series and early science fiction stuff from her on sale. So A Passage of Stars, The Price of Ransom, and Revolution Shore. So again, I'll get around to reading them at some point. A lot of my ebook purchases are kind of like this. And next up is a classic sci-fi that I have never read, which is kind of shameful considering I'm a huge fan of classic science fiction. And this one is Neuromancer by William Gibson. I mean, it's one of, I guess, more of a cyberpunk, I think, that sort of area. But yeah, it's I need to check that box off and read that book. So I picked that up. And my next big fantasy undertaking is going to be Malazan Book of the Fallen, that whole epic fantasy series. So in preparation for that, I did pick up Gardens of the Moon by Stephen Erickson. It's the first book in that series. I bought it on ebook. I think I have it on Audible as well, but I'll have to double check. I'm really looking forward to that. That's a little later in the year. I'll be starting on that. And that's probably going to take me into a decent chunk of 2020. After that, next up is another favorite author of mine, Gail Z. Martin. She writes some high fantasy, and she also has this urban fantasy series, Deadly Curiosities. I read the first book when it first came out, and I recently finally finished reading the second book, Vendetta. And then I saw that there was a third book that I didn't even realize was out called Tangled Web. So I picked that up on ebook, and there's two short story collections, Trifles in Folly and Trifles in Folly 2. One of my favorite things about Gail Z. Martin as an author is she picks a character from each of the different series she writes, and then she writes a whole bunch of short stories about that character's past. So you slowly learn that whole character's history. And then when she has enough of these short stories that she sells, on ebook and stuff, she'll put them together into a physical book collection. And there's a whole bunch of them now for Trifles in Folly, which I think deal with the backstory of Soren, who's this like 400-year-old vampire. Really fun urban fantasy stories set in Charleston, South Carolina, that deals with like neutralizing everyday items that become supernaturally active. Fun stuff. So I picked up those. I've already read Tangled Web, the third book, and now I have the short stories that I can just kind of work my way through. And next up is another book that I've already read since purchasing and now making this video, and that is The Raven Boys, the first book by Maggie Stiefvater in the Raven Cycle. This is, when I first joined BookTube, this was one of the series that was making the rounds that people were raving about. And one of my favorite channels, Morgie Reads. Morgan just adores this whole series. And just on her recommendation alone and her just gushing over it, I knew I'd get around to reading it eventually. So I picked up the first book. I actually got it on ebook and on Kindle, not on Kindle, on Audible. And great Audible book. So I was actually really surprised by how much I enjoyed this book. And I will definitely be reading the rest of the series, and I'm looking forward to it. Well, I'll fit it in throughout the year, I think. And I'll definitely be mostly doing the audiobook, but I like to listen to an Audible and read along on the ebook. But great recommendation, Morgan. Really looking forward to the rest. And one of the things that have been growing in me is I've been away from science fiction for way too long. I'm a big fantasy fan and a big science fiction fan. And since I've joined BookTube, the bulk of my reading has really been dominated by fantasy. And it's just a growing urge to get back to science fiction. And there's a series that's been on my radar for a long time. And I read the first book quite a long time ago, maybe 10 years ago. And that's On Basilisk Station, the first book by David Weber in the Honor Arrington series. And what I liked about it also is the narrator for the ebooks, the narrator for the Audible is the same narrator from all this old first book all the way through to current, the most recently released one. So I'm finally going to get back in and dive into that series because I do need to read some sci-fi. Though probably after I read Stephen R. Donaldson's Gap stories. So next up is I picked up an ebook on sale again of a book I already have in paperback. And that is the 100,000 Kingdoms, the first book in N.K. Jemison's The Inheritance trilogy. So another story I still need to read, but figured my physical books, 99.9% of all my physical books are still in storage in New York. They're going to be there a while. It's really expensive to get all that stuff shipped down here because I had to come down for work way ahead of actually having an apartment and yada yada yada. So yeah, so I've been collecting on ebooks some of the physical books that I have that I know I want to read before I end up getting my books back. But enough of a tangent there. My last ebook purchase was The Last Chronicles of Thomas Covenant, The Runes of Earth, Book 1. I am finally reading the final 4 books of that whole big story. So I'm actually on the first or second chapter right now. That's my main read right now, is to finish that series, which is one of my all-time favorites. And that pretty much is it for the ebooks. And next is Audible purchases that I purchased specifically as Audible. And the first one is Freshwater by Akwaeke Emezi. This came on recommendation from Njeri of Onyx Pages. She has a great BookTube channel, one of my absolute favorite channels. She did a book review of particularly the Audible version, and I knew I had to get it after watching her review. So I picked up the Audible, and about 25% of the way listening to the story, I did end up getting it on ebook as well. And Freshwater is absolutely amazing. It is right now my favorite read of 2019, and we're halfway through the year. And good luck, authors, knocking that out of the top spot for me for this year. We'll see. And the other Audible books I bought specifically as Audible are the first 2 Nevernight books, Nevernight and God's Grave. Now I hear mixed reviews. Some people love this series, other people, eh. But the third and final book is coming out in September. There's a book, a read-along that's about to start in July. Nevernight in July and God's Grave in August, leading up to the final book. And these I picked up because most Audible books, if you buy the Kindle, the ebook, you can get the Audible at a really discounted price. Like a $25, $30 Audible book you can get for like $12 if you purchase the ebook. But not these. There's no discount. So I got both of these with successive, like my free credit of the month. And we'll see what they're like. But I'm going to start listening to them, next week. Because I'm going to participate, if I can, in that sort of read-along. And we'll see how it is. I know I probably need to get the ebooks because apparently there's a lot of, like, start of each chapter has, like, italicized stuff that's sort of flashbacks or different timeline stuff, so it probably would be confusing in just the audiobook, but we'll see. Okay, and now on to the physical books.